we're seeing the tide turn on hormone replacement therapy. And I know that's not what this entire episode's about, but as a reproductive endocrinologist, I love estrogen. I love hormones. And I think it's really important for women to know that you can start hormone replacement therapy at any time. So even though a long time ago we felt really comfortable starting it right at the time of menopause, we're starting to see benefits starting in the perimenopausal period. We see a benefit starting at once you have menopause. But I think it's a disservice to women to make them have no period, ovarian failure for 12 months, no estrogen, feel terrible, before we'll allow them to have hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, this is such an important theme. And if I may, I realize I have to be very careful to not draw parallels to men's hormonal health when talking about women's hormonal health, because it's not a one-for-one. They're very distinct processes. On the other hand, I think thematically, what I'm about to say, I believe holds. So hopefully it won't upset too many people, which is, for many years now, for reasons that are unfair, hormone replacement therapy was sort of became widely available for men before it became widely available for women. There are reasons for this. We don't have to go into it, but they're the kind of obvious ones, that things were pushed to market more quickly and so forth. But there's been this idea, it's usually testosterone replacement therapy, right? And there was this idea that unless somebody fell below 300 nanograms per deciliter for a male, that they weren't, that they shouldn't get testosterone replacement therapy. Now it's kind of understood that if somebody chooses, they can usually find a doctor that if they're at the low end of normal, they can push to the high end of normal or to the middle of the range, so that they can get their symptoms away and just feel right, to optimize within the normal range. That's sort of, and so I'm relieved to hear that you're saying the same is true for women. And I'm relieved to hear it because I think that having these strict cutoffs of like no periods for a year, well, I mean, it could take a long time to reach that. I mean, what if it's, 2 periods per year, right? Does that mean that person doesn't deserve the therapy, which is essentially what I think you're saying. So the R in hormone replacement is the dangerous letter, in my opinion, because there is this notion of augmenting hormones.
Exactly.
Okay, so forgive me for going long, but I think the two situations, it would be great if both women and men could augment their hormones to be at the high end of normal or wherever puts them in a place where they're not experiencing symptoms.
Absolutely. We know that as humans, we now have longer lifespans. We outlive our reproductive hormones, yet they are essential for our day-to-day function and to feel our best. And we should at least be given the opportunity to have our symptoms evaluated, to be offered hormone therapy if we want it, and to not have to have these harsh cutoffs, especially for something that can be so protective long-term. I mean, for women, we see it be cardioprotective. It can help lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Of course, it can be protective for your bones. So I love this greater discussion, and it really stems from learning about your body, knowing what's normal so you can advocate for what's not normal, and really feeling like you have your own agency over your health and your own future.
I wish that the medical profession could agree on nomenclature that included hormone replacement, the R, replacement therapy for people that are out of range, they're too low, out of the normal reference range. Hormone augmentation therapy for people that want to push within the normal range. And then, of course, there's super physiological stuff. And that's kind of how all of this got here, was there were a bunch of mainly guys taking tons of anabolic steroids. And then estrogen's a steroid, testosterone's a steroid. And then it just became a long road to get to this point where people like you are able to even talk about this, right? I mean, I think 10 years ago, I think the medical profession was not open to the idea that a 40-year-old woman, for instance, who had not yet undergone menopause by the strict definition, would take estrogen. It was seen as a risk as opposed to a benefit.
Isn't it interesting? And, by professional organizations, they would even call it menopausal hormone therapy, MHT, not even just hormone replacement therapy. And I talk about this a lot with my patients, the difference in replacing a hormone. We'll use in an embryo transfer cycle. If I'm going to give you estrogen, you haven't ovulated, I now have to replace your progesterone, or I have to give it in a certain format that it can get to high enough levels, versus supplementing. Your body's making some, and we're supplementing that or augmenting it, like you said, to get it to the appropriate level or to make sure we have enough. I've given hormone therapy for a long time, right? I've been out of practice for over 10 years. And what's so interesting is that we'll use premature ovarian failure. So going into ovarian failure before age 40, well accepted that these women need hormone replacement, even when they still have the low end of hormonal function. So in this population, we've been doing it for a really long time. But for menopause, it's been so frowned upon because of the WHI and fear-based tactics about what would happen with hormone replacement. So it's interesting, and I'm really glad to see the tide is turning, and we're really allowing people to stand up for themselves, to also know what's normal within their body, which sounds so common. But if we think about it, many women have been dismissed and gaslit for so long. And if you go to your doctor and you talk about your painful periods or your irregular cycles or your bloating that you have with your period and some of these red flag warning signs, the spotting, the this, and it gets pushed to the side, when you start to go through actual hormonal change later, it's really hard to then believe yourself. And so I think it's really important. I have a whole chapter in the book about how to learn to track your cycle and your ovulation and really learn to see the red flags your body gives you, not just if you want to get pregnant now, but to know that your hormones are really functioning as they should. And that's going to help you stand up for yourself later when you're in this transitional period, because perimenopause or diminished ovarian reserve, like we call it in the fertility world, that can last 5 to 10 years. That can be a really long transitional period that women are going through, and they deserve support if they're not feeling their best.
Are all now I want to call it hormone augmentation, let's just call it hormone replacement for sake of simplicity. Hormone therapies for women, do they always start with estrogen when it comes to trying to encourage fertility or push fertility or well-being out into more years?
That's an interesting question. I think when it comes to hormone replacement therapy in general, we've got estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Most women, when they start not reliably making estrogen, that's when they really start to feel bad. And so typically some type of estrogen replacement, and there's many different ways, right? There's patches, there's pills, there's vaginal inserts, there's vaginal cream, often helps some of the symptoms they're having. But progesterone alone or in combination can be a big player. Progesterone also is not made if you're not ovulating well. So there's this tandem where often you need both of them. But I have some perimenopausal patients who feel great on just progesterone. To me, testosterone's the last one we add to the mix, and it will always depend on clinical scenario. There's nuance. Estrogen and testosterone can convert back and forth. So for most women, if they are adequately being replaced on estrogen and they still have functioning ovaries, so in this transitional period, they tend to not need testosterone, but that's never 100% of the time. I think greater to your question about how is there a way for us to extend the ovarian lifespan is a really good one. We know that women who go into ovarian failure early, so when we look at that, we call it POI, the premature ovarian insufficiency group, their ovaries have more inflammatory markers. They have more chronic inflammation and fibrosis inside the ovary. There's a higher prevalence with autoimmune disease or chronic inflammatory disorders. So I think there's also something to be said, despite not having the perfect paper to sit here and say, that we know a variety of different things that increase chronic inflammation, cause you to have a lower egg count, and are associated with earlier menopause or earlier ovarian failure, that paying attention to these factors earlier in your life, whether it's controlling an autoimmune disease, earlier diagnosis of Hashimoto's, whether it's treating your endometriosis, or cultivating a lifestyle that's decreasing inflammation, right? Avoiding certain toxins, eating anti-inflammatory foods, the type of exercise, and how we deal with those lifestyle tenets, that likely has the capability to extend our ovarian lifespan to the degree that it can.